I'm excited to bring you a new Marvel Champions deck building idea. This is the Hulk deck mixed with the Justice aspect. I think this is a really exciting deck build. It is a great solo deck combination. It offers pretty high damage output and the ability to thwart. It's a great way to play solo games and even some multiplayer. This is the deck build. First, take all of your hero cards from the Hulk set. Next are your general resources, 1 copy of Energy, Genius, and Strength, 2 copies of the Power of Justice, 1 copy of the Avengers Mansion, 1 Helicarrier, and the Quinn Carrier. For survivability, add 1 copy of Endurance and Downtime. Next, you're going to add 1 copy of Under Surveillance, 2 copies of To the Rescue. This is a thwarting card that is a general sort of basic card. The reason why we're adding that is because of the physical resources. 1 copy of Mockingbird, 1 copy of Nick Fury, 2 copies of Concussive Blow, 3 copies of Beat Cop, which is a fantastic card that comes in the Hulk set, 3 copies of For Justice, 1 copy of Jessica Jones, and finally 1 copy of Daredevil. We're going to talk really quick about your mulligan and opening hand. Here's some cards that I recommend keeping in your opening draw, and then discard other cards so you can hopefully get some of the ones that are on the table. First is Quinn Carrier, a very universal, fantastic resource generating card that generates a wild resource. Next, in the middle, we have Limitless Strength. What's great about this card, it provides 3 physical resources, which is really great on your first turn to get some of your resource generating stuff out on the table, your permanent either supports or upgrades. And then finally, Helicarrier, it's kind of a no-brainer. You put it out and it helps you with resource management throughout the game. This deck has a high survivability rating. The Incredible Hulk starts with a whopping 18 hit points. To further enhance his survivability, add 1 copy of Downtime to the deck. That's going to add a +2 value to the recovery score. In addition to that, Banner's Laboratory, which is seen on the right-hand side of the screen, will add an additional 2 recovery to the Incredible Hulk, specifically Bruce Banner. Now, if you have both those cards out, the recovery value is 8, which is absolutely massive. That's fantastic. In the middle of the screen, we have 1 copy of Endurance that adds 3 hit points. And then we also have Immovable Object, which adds an additional 4 hit points. Having both of these out in conjunction with Hulk will give you 25 hit points and 1 retaliation. To make this deck even crazier, the Incredible Hulk starts with a 3 defense. So if you need to block and soak up some damage, the Incredible Hulk has massive staying power, and it's a really fantastic way to stay in the game. You're not going to get KO'd and knocked out. Your biggest problem with playing the Incredible Hulk is that he has a thwart of 0. So kind of why I mixed the Justice aspect in, although he's highly survivable. When I was losing games, it was typically because of the side schemes and the schemes building up, and I was losing because of that. So really what I wanted to do is compensate for his weakness of thwarting by putting the Justice aspect into the deck. There is a theme on some of the hero cards that are found in the Incredible Hulk deck, specifically on Hulk Smash and Suborbital Leap. If you look at both of these cards, they get a lot better if you only spend physical resources on them. So one of the things you're going to note on this deck is that a lot of the cards that were added, Justice or basic cards, those have a lot of physical icons and resources on them, so you can help trigger some of these abilities. Hulk Smash, for an example, gains Overkill if you only use the physical resource. Suborbital Leap removes the amount of threats by 5 with 1 card. That's absolutely amazing. It's a little bit hard sometimes to get all those physical resources. So as we said before, the way that you can mitigate some of these effects and make them really easy to play, copy of Helicarrier and Quinn Carrier. So Helicarrier is going to reduce the overall cost by 1, which means you only need 2 physical resources to trigger these events. It just says that you can only use physical resources to pay for the card. So if you're paying 1 less, you only need 2 physical resources. The Quinn Carrier is fantastic. It's a wild resource, so just convert it to a physical. So having both the Helicarrier out and the Quinn Carrier out are really important at the beginning of the game to get the most out of these 2 cards, Hulk Smash and Suborbital Leap. It'll make it so you basically only need 1 physical resource to pay to trigger these effects fully. So be on the lookout for that. It's a really easy way to maximize the amount of damage and threat reduction in this deck. Here's another example of the theme of only using physical resources. Both Unstoppable Force and Crushing Blow require you to have those physical resources. So it's very important that you do that. Unstoppable Force, if you have the 2 physical resources, you get to draw an extra card, which is fantastic. Hulk has a limitation. He only has a 4 hand size, so that's something that you're going to have to sort of compensate for. Secondarily, Crushing Blow, you can only spend a physical resource to play the card. So once again, you're seeing that theme again, using physical resources. So that's why Helicarrier and Quinn Carrier are so important right out of the gate, probably Quinn Carrier more so than anything, because you can use that to provide that physical resource to play. Let's talk about the justice aspect of the deck really quick. Beat Cop is a fantastic card. Now, it costs 3 to bring it out, but it's a permanent support card. Every single turn, you can exhaust and remove 1 threat from a scheme, okay? And what's great is that it can be a side scheme or it can be the primary scheme. It doesn't matter. All you have to do is simply exhaust the Beat Cop to move one of those threats onto it. Then at a later time, if you want, you can exhaust and discard the Beat Cop to deal 1 damage to a minion for each threat here. When I first started playing this, I was like, discarding the Beat Cop. And then what I figured out is that the cost economy for this card is ridiculous. There were multiple games where I had 2 or 3 Beat Cops out, and you just whittle down the threat every single turn, and you leave the Beat Cops in play. So it wasn't uncommon for me to have 8, 9, or 10 threats sometimes on these cards if you're playing a little bit of a longer game. That's really awesome cost economy. So for 3 resources, you can remove, a ton of threat from the table. And I defy you to find something else that you can only spend 3 and you can remove, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 threats when you're playing a game, especially if you bring a Beat Cop out early. You can completely sustain threat mitigation and threat reduction by simply having these Beat Cops out in play. Now, although they're expensive, I do recommend having 3 of them in your deck. Even in multiplayer games, you can whittle that threat down, and it's amazing how easy it is to control the threat by using the Beat Cop itself. Also note that it has a physical resource in the bottom corner. Next, I threw in a couple copies of Concussive Blow, and this is going to allow us to confuse an enemy to further prevent it from scheming and really kind of make sure that if we're in our alter ego mode, that we don't have to worry about it. In addition to that, it has the sort of physical resource activator on it, that you get something else out of it, which is to deal 3 points of damage if you paid 1 physical resource. Once again, the Quinn Carrier comes to the rescue to help you pay for these costs on the card. And also, too, there are so many physical resources in the deck, it's really easy to play and trigger that secondary ability. Another great way to maintain threat, and I literally recommend using Under Surveillance in any Justice deck, just having 1 copy, it goes a long way. So for only 2 costs, it's an upgrade, and it sits on the main scheme. Now note that you can only have 1 copy of it, and there's only 1 main scheme out in play anyway, so really having extra copies of this in your deck, I think, is a little bit of a waste. But this increases the target threat value of the scheme by 4. So as an example, if we're looking at the break-in from the Rhino scenario, it has a 7 value. This is actually going to make this an 11. And what's great about this is that you won't lose the game, and for some of those other main schemes that will flip over into other additional schemes during the game, it'll prevent you from advancing or losing the game. So for 2 costs, it just sits out on the scheme, and you get 4 extra threat that you can put down. That's huge. Now, the other thing that's interesting about it is it modifies the value, which is the 7. So you also get an adjustment per player. And what's great is that if you have 2 players, this is essentially 8 points of threat that you have to build up on the card. And so for each additional player that you have, it actually multiplies it, which is really fantastic. So 1 copy of Under Surveillance goes a long way in these decks. This deck also has additional threat mitigation by having 5 additional cards, so 2 copies of To the Rescue and 3 copies of For Justice. Now, what I like about To the Rescue is that it has physical resources on the corner, so you can burn those cards as a resource if you're trying to get out some of the bigger Hulk abilities, which is great. For Justice, this is just kind of the basic threat mitigation card that comes in the basic set. Thunderclap is a 3-cost card that actually does pretty well at destroying and maiming minions. What's great about it is that you play 3 and you can hit up to 3 different enemies for 3 points of damage, so that's 9 total. It's somewhat a little bit hard to hit 3 targets sometimes, especially if you're playing a solo game, but where this card comes into play is it's a lot easier to use during multiplayer. As a note, Hulk has a pretty difficult detrimental effect that makes playing him hard, and it's that you have to discard your hand every time you're done with your turn. That makes it really difficult if you have something good in your hand, let's say it's the Avengers Mansion, or something you want to keep in play. You don't have the opportunity to keep it for next turn. Hulk is very impulsive, very aggressive, and I think the enraged sort of skill that he has really sort of thematically speaks to Hulk. It's just this reckless killing machine that just jumps in there and starts pounding and smashing and doesn't really think about the consequences sometimes. So be really careful, be really cautious. If you have something in your hand that you want to use, make sure you focus on that first. Since your hand size is only 4, you're going to have a lot of limitations on what you can play each turn. Now, when you do play something, it's going to hit hard, or the thwarting ability is going to be very, very good if you manage to get all of those physical resources. So be really cognizant of making the play with Hulk. You're going to make a lot of big plays, okay, but you're not going to be spending a lot of cards. So when you do hit and when you do act, it's going to be very big, but you're not going to be able to do a ton of cards like some of the other characters where you can sometimes play out, 2 or 3, sometimes even a 4th card if you have a ton of resources or cards in your hand. So you're really going to have to overcome that hand size. One way to do that, obviously, is the Avengers Mansion. So get that out. It's kind of hard to get the Avengers Mansion out when you're playing Hulk, so always be on the lookout for Limitless Strength in conjunction with your permanent resource building style cards, whether that's the Helicarrier or the Quinn Carrier or the Avengers Mansion itself. So be really cognizant when you get Limitless Strength in your hand, what you can spend it on to permanently improve Hulk and his ability to be a little bit less reckless. To sum it up, Hulk is a great character, super aggressive, super fun to play. The best way to compensate, in my opinion, for the low thwarting ability that Hulk has is to mix it with the justice aspect. I tried all the different aspects. Obviously, aggression works very, very well. It's super easy to play. I think one of the things I kept hitting was if I didn't kill everything fast enough, I would lose the game because the main scheme would have so many threats on it. So time and time again, what I found is that if I controlled Hulk a little bit better by using some of the threat management cards, specifically Beat Cop really seems to work well with this deck. He's just rampaging while the Beat Cop is just sort of endlessly burning down threats. I think that's a really easy combo. What I liked about this deck is that I could solo pretty much everything with it. I played through pretty much everybody except for one of the Green Goblins, and it worked really, really well. So I highly recommend trying this out and mixing it with Justice. It just felt really good. It was super easy to play once I figured it out, and I think I was able to effectively deal pretty much with any of the scenarios. So if you're looking for a sort of solo player deck, I highly recommend this. I think it also works very well multiplayer. I played many 2-player games. I didn't have a chance to do any 3 or 4-player games for this deck build, but I think it works very, very well. I want to thank you again for spending your time with me today, and as always, have fun gaming.